In this lesson, we're going to be looking at loops. And what do loops do? They give you the ability to save you time by writing out a bunch of code really easily. So we can execute a block of code any number of times. So let's set up a more typical for loop. So we need to declare a variable that we want to use. We're going to set up using x. And then we're going to use that condition that we saw in the earlier lessons. And we're going to check to see while x is less than 10. And then we need a way out of our loop. And don't forget, you need to way out. So that's the increment of that loop value. So what is a loop going to do? So we'll see within the console. And what we'll do is we'll just console log the value of x. So we see that what happens is coming in, x is set to a value of 0. So it outputs that value in the console. And then once it finishes executing the block of code, it goes through this again. And while this condition is true, it's going to continue that value. So at this point, when x reaches a value of 10, 10 is no longer less than 10. So that's where we break our loop. And all the time, every time we're iterating through, we're incrementing x by 1. So that's the quick and easy way to create loops, which give you the ability to write code multiple times. So as well, we could just as easily put this out into message. And the thing with message is, though, it's going to overwrite whatever the last value is. So we're going to end up with a 9 in there. So it's not going to show as nice and neatly as we saw within the console. So there's a bunch of different types of loops. So for loops are some of the most common ones. They're also used often in conjunction with arrays. So let's set up a quick array. And I'm just going to use numbers within the array. And we saw that with arrays, we had a length value. So we know that we can loop through while x is less than the myArray length. And we also saw that arrays start at 0, so we can keep that value there as well. And then instead of outputting it, I'm going to go back to the console message so we can see the full output there. And instead of outputting the whole array, we're going to select each array item as we iterate through it. And you can see that what it did is it simply looped out and looped through all of the items in the array and executed out those numbers that were contained within the array. We can also loop through objects as well. So we've got an object here, and I'm going to create a really simple object here. So give it first. So first name and last. And you can have any number of items here within the object. So I'm going to just create a really quick and simple one. And if you want to loop through the values within object, you can set as variable x in my object. And this gives us the ability to loop out those values so we can console log out. And we've got some options here as well. So we can do the my object. And we saw that with arrays before that we can use the array key name like this. So let's see what happens. So we see that it loops that out. And if you want to see just the key itself, so we can output x there as well. So as it's looping through, it's going through first, it's going through last, just like what we saw within the array. And of course, arrays have the index values. So what we're doing is x is equal to first. So this is the same thing as saying first and then saying last. So let me change that back. Now there are different types of loops as well. So most commonly you will encounter the for loops, but there's also while loops. So while loops work within the same format. So going up to our for loop where we had that up here where we set initial value. Let's create that initial value as well. So do variable x. Another type of loop that is commonly encountered in JavaScript is a while loop. So this one is a little bit different, but the structure is the same thing. So we need to set a variable, or set a variable of x, set it out to our starting value, which in this case is going to be 0. We're going to loop through x while it's less than the value of 10. And then this is the block of code that we're going to be executing out. So we output console, and for now, let's just output x. And we also need a way out of our loop. Just as before, we need to increment x in order to find a way out of it. So let's refresh. And you can see that this is the while loop that's running down here. And literally it's the same thing as the for loop. There is a big difference here though. So if I do set the value to 10, we see what happens here is that it doesn't run at all. So if you do need to execute the block of code at least one time, that's where you can use a do loop. So in this case, I'm going to use I. So set the value of I to 0, and then we're going to do, and then this is where we execute the block of code. So we'll output the value of I there. And then we need a way out of the loop. So that's where we do that increment of I. So if you don't find a way out of the loop, then you're going to, the browser's going to continue to try to run that until it times out. And then next, we need to add the while. So we're adding the while here at the end. So this is part of the do while loop. And we're going to while it is while I is less than 10. So see, it's pretty much literally the same thing as the do loop. So let me change this one back to 0. So you can see that it's the same thing, same output. And the difference here is if we change I to 10 and we refresh it, we see that what's happened here is that it runs it one time. So this is the actual invoking of this loop where we're going through the do loop, and it runs it at least one time because a condition is afterwards. So our condition is sitting after we actually execute that block of code. So if you do need it to run at least one time, then you can do a do while loop. If you want to execute a number of times, you can do a while loop. And probably the most common way is doing it within the for loop. And then you've got some options with arrays and objects to output the content of those as well. So I know we've got covered off quite a bit within this lesson, and I do want to give you an opportunity to try this out for yourself. The different types of loops, try them out for yourself. Create an array, create an object, or you can take one of the ones from the earlier lessons and output that within your console.